They say not every story has to be dramatic. Some stories unfold slowly, like rain soaking into soil, or like tea cooling in a quiet room. This is one of those stories. It's the story of Harold M. Ellison, a man most people never noticed, and who never wanted to be noticed. Born in 1951 in the town of Woodvale, nestled somewhere between nowhere and a little more of nowhere, Harold lived a life that was wonderfully uneventful. A librarian by profession and by temperament, Harold had never broken a rule, never missed a morning walk, and never owned more than 2 pairs of shoes, and both were brown. He wasn't lonely. He wasn't especially cheerful either. But Harold had something rare, peace. He found comfort in ordinary things, the soft scratch of a pen, the way books settled onto shelves, the smell of old paper warmed by sunlight. He believed that routine was not a trap, but a quiet sort of freedom. This story follows one full day in Harold's life. Nothing unusual happens. The weather is mild, the tea never spills, the library doesn't catch fire, and no long-lost relatives come knocking. But in the stillness of his world, there is something calming, something grounding. So if you're ready to rest, to relax, to let go of the day behind you, come along. Now Harold has just woken up. The morning light seeped gently through Harold's floral patterned curtains, casting pale, uneven rectangles across the faded carpet. It was just past 6:58 a.m., though Harold had not yet looked at the small brass clock on his nightstand. He didn't need to. His body, after 73 years of quiet habit, knew exactly when to stir. He blinked once, then twice, his gaze settling on the same patch of ceiling he had looked at every morning for the past 31 years. There was a tiny hairline crack in the paint, like a delicate pencil line sketched by time itself. He had often thought about painting over it, but never quite got around to it. After all, the crack wasn't hurting anyone, and it gave his eyes something to do during those first few moments of the day. Slowly, with the stiffness of age but the steadiness of practice, Harold turned on his side. He reached for his glasses, resting neatly beside the clock, exactly where he had left them the night before, precisely aligned with the edge of the wooden table. He slid them onto his nose with both hands, adjusting each arm by feel. The familiar clarity returned. Still lying down, he allowed his eyes to settle on the lace doily draped over the top of his nightstand. It was ivory white, handmade by his Aunt Margaret in 1972. He had dusted it just last Thursday. Harold finally sat up. There was no rush. The kettle wouldn't start boiling until he turned it on, and nothing truly important would happen before 10 a.m. anyway. He sat still for a while longer, feeling the air. It was cool this morning, not cold, not warm, the kind of temperature that didn't ask for socks, but didn't complain if you wore them. With a slow exhale, he swung his legs over the edge of the bed, one slipper waiting for each foot. He slid into them with the same deliberate ease he had developed over the years. Not too fast, not too slow, just right. Harold stood up. His dressing gown was draped over the back of the wooden chair by the window, folded neatly into thirds. He picked it up, shook it once gently, to release any imagined creases, and slipped it over his pale blue pajamas. He always wore pale blue. Nothing too bright. Bright colors were for people who wanted attention. Harold had long since discovered that calm shades made for calm moods. He shuffled into the kitchen, a small square room with cream-colored cabinets and a round table set for one. On the windowsill, an old ceramic pot housed a wilting mint plant that had once thrived. Harold made a mental note to water it today, though he would likely forget. Still, the intention was comforting. He filled the kettle with water, not too full, just enough for a single mug, and placed it on the stove. As it warmed, he stood by the counter and watched the shadows dance across the tiled backs. The tiles were white with tiny brown dots. Installed in 1989, he remembered choosing them after seeing something similar in a home improvement catalog. He hadn't read the catalog, just flipped through it one quiet afternoon. The kettle began to hum softly, a prelude to the boil. Harold took a tin from the cupboard above, labeled simply tea. Inside were loose black leaves. He measured 1 3/4 teaspoons into a strainer, tapping it lightly to level it out. He liked the flavor strong, but not bitter. He placed the strainer into his favorite mug, white chipped near the handle, with the faded image of a duck in a yellow hat. Once the water boiled, he poured it over the leaves, watching the dark swirls bloom like smoke in slow motion. He set the mug on the table, sat down with a sigh, and waited 3 minutes exactly for it to steep. While he waited, he gazed at the kitchen clock. A simple battery-powered one with black numbers and red hands. It ticked steadily, each second a gentle tap. Harold had changed the battery last April. After 3 minutes, He removed the strainer, setting it on a folded paper towel next to the spoon. He added a single sugar cube and stirred slowly, clockwise, 10 times. He never stirred counterclockwise. He didn't remember why, but it felt wrong to do so. He lifted the mug, cupping it with both hands. It was pleasantly warm. He took a sip, then another. The taste was exactly as he expected. Predictable, soothing, just the way it had always been. Outside the window, the village was waking up in its own way. A pigeon landed on the rooftop across the street. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of the tree near the lamppost. The world turned slowly, steadily, without any need for attention or fanfare. Harold sat in silence, sipping his tea and staring at nothing in particular. He liked mornings like this, mornings where nothing needed to happen, and everything that did happen was simple, small, and unremarkable. When the tea was done, he stood and washed the mug, drying it with a soft cloth and placing it back on the hook under the cupboard. Everything in its place, that's how he liked it. He returned to the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. Inside were 4 identical shirts, light brown, and 3 pairs of dark slacks. He chose a shirt and pants at random. It didn't matter which. They were all the same. He dressed slowly, tucking the shirt in with care, buttoning each button precisely, never skipping one. He checked the mirror not for vanity, but to make sure nothing was crooked. Then he picked up his brown cap, the one with the small pin shaped like a book. He didn't remember where he got the pin, but he'd worn it every day since 2006. With one final glance at the now neatly made bed, Harold opened the front door and stepped out into the quiet morning. The air smelled faintly of earth and distant toast. It was time to walk to the library. Absolutely. Here are section 2 to section 5 of the sleep story, each written in a gentle, calming tone and approximately 1,000 words long. The pacing is slow, repetitive, and perfect for winding down. These follow directly from section 1, where Harold left his house to walk to the library. Harold stepped onto the cobbled pavement, the faintest sound of his worn shoes tapping in rhythm with the morning. The sun hadn't yet risen fully, but the light was changing. A soft golden haze crept along the rooftops, bathing the street in a sleepy kind of warmth. Birds cooed quietly. A cat blinked at him from under a parked car, then yawned and looked away. He took the same path he always did, left at the postbox with the chipped red paint. Straight past Mrs. Whitlow's hedges, still perfectly trimmed, and then another left past the bakery, though it wouldn't open for another minutes. Harold didn't walk quickly. He wasn't late. He had never once been late to the library in over 30 years. He took his time, pausing every now and then to observe things that never really changed. A cracked paving stone he'd stepped over 1,000 times, a crooked mailbox that leaned just slightly more each year. The way sunlight filtered through, the tall maple trees, making quiet patterns on the sidewalk. At the corner of Penfold Lane and Havers Street, he stopped and looked at the park across the road. The benches were empty, as usual. The swings didn't move. Everything was still a perfect kind of still, the kind that didn't feel lonely, just resting. He passed the hardware store, with its dusty window display of screwdrivers, gardening, gloves, and one plastic watering can that had been sun-faded beyond recognition. The sign above the shop had been hanging crooked since 2003. Harold knew this because he'd written it down once in a little blue notebook. The same notebook where he recorded dates like when the library got a new vacuum or when a particular shelf began to creak. He walked past the quiet houses, each with its own story Harold had long since imagined. There was the blue door with the wind chime that only rang in the lightest breeze, the ivy-covered wall where a sparrow once nested, the metal gate that clicked when it shut, though no one seemed to use it. Halfway to the library, Harold reached the stone bridge over Willow Creek. He always paused there, resting both hands on the cool, worn railing. The water below moved slowly, reflecting the soft colors of the sky and the gentle shapes of trees. Leaves floated lazily by, caught in the current. Occasionally he would see a duck or a frog, though today there was nothing. Just water and silence. After 3 minutes, always 3, Harold continued. He passed the bus stop, though he had never taken the bus. The timetable was faded, and the plastic cover had a small crack in the corner. He nodded at it, as if it had greeted him. Just before the library came into view, Harold stopped at the small community board, nailed to a lamppost. It was filled with flyers, piano lessons, a lost cat, a second-hand lawnmower for sale. Most of them had been there for months, curling at the edges. He liked the familiarity of the board. The same lost cat notice had been there since February, though Harold suspected the cat had returned long ago. Finally, he turned the corner onto Alder Street, and there it was, the library. A modest red brick building with ivy creeping up. one side and two square windows that never quite aligned. A sign above the door read Woodvale Public Library. The paint slightly faded, just like everything else in Harold's life. He smiled faintly. Another morning, another quiet walk, exactly as it should be. Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle of keys attached to a worn leather strap. Each key was labeled with a tiny paper tag wrapped in clear tape, a system he had invented himself. There were keys for the front door, the back door, the storage closet, the basement switch, and the cabinet that held the spare light bulbs, which almost never needed replacing. He selected the front door key and inserted it carefully into the lock. The metal clicked softly as it turned. Harold paused to enjoy the sound. It was a reassuring sound, one that told him the world was still in place. The door creaked as it opened, not from age, but from use. It was oiled twice a year, precisely on the first Tuesday of March and the last Friday of September. Inside, the air smelled of books and polished wood, not musty, not fragrant, just library-scented, a scent made from quietpages.com routines. And time. He stepped inside, turned the small brass sign to open at 9 o'clock, even though no one would arrive for hours, and walked to the light panel near the reception desk. He flipped the switches in sequence. Main lights first, then desk lamps, then reading area, one by one. The lights blinked on with a soft hum. Harold removed his coat and placed it on the peg behind the desk. He laid his cap gently on the chair, and reached for the attendance log, a simple spiral-bound notebook with ruled lines. He wrote his name, date, and time of arrival with his favorite pen, a black ballpoint that rarely smudged. Then, he walked down the center aisle, past rows and rows of books, fiction to the left, reference to the right, and made his way to the utility cupboard. Inside were cleaning supplies, a broom, a duster, a spare box of bookmarks, and the old radio he never turned on. He retrieved the feather duster and began his morning routine, starting at the far wall, dusting the tops of the shelves in gentle, deliberate strokes. It was important not to disturb the book order. Harold didn't use a vacuum too noisy. The duster was better. It let him hear the soft creaks of the building, the whispers of age and use. He moved slowly, shelf by shelf, stopping only to straighten a misaligned book or inspect a small cobweb near the ceiling. The library didn't need unlocking in any grand sense. It was always open in Harold's mind. But the ritual, the key, the lights, the duster, was what made it feel official, made it feel real. And so the day began, as it always did. The duster was old, the handle wrapped in peeling green tape where the wood had split slightly years ago, but Harold saw no reason to replace it. It still worked, and it fit comfortably in his hand, balanced just right. He began in the back corner of the library. At the local history section, these shelves held records from Woodvale's past, yellowed papers, town council minutes from the 1950s, and grainy black and white photographs of buildings long gone. Harold dusted the tops of each frame gently, pausing to study one of the older photos. It showed the library itself, newly built, without ivy, and with a crooked sign that looked exactly the same as today. He moved down the row, one book at a time. His method was methodical. Lift, dust the shelf, dust the top edge of the book, return to place, repeat. Sometimes he muttered the titles quietly to himself. The Chronicles of Woodvale, Milling History of the Northern District, *, Baker, Family Census Records 1901 to 1915, *, nothing anyone checked out, but still important. Harold enjoyed this part of his job. It was quiet work, repetitive, peaceful. The books never argued. They never needed hurrying. They were just there, waiting to be cared for. As he moved into the general fiction aisle, a tiny layer of dust floated in the morning sunbeam. He watched it for a moment, swirling lazily in the golden light, a speck of calm in a room full of stillness. Shelf after shelf, row after row, dusting, adjusting, breathing, and always silence. Once the dusting was complete, Harold returned to the front desk and reached into the drawer beneath it. Inside was a large printed inventory binder, alphabetized and highlighted with his own color system. Green meant shelved, blue meant checked out, orange meant under repair. There were no red entries. He didn't like red. He opened to the first section, A. He began reading, slowly, out loud to himself, just above a whisper. Eleanor, the Wind That Never Came. Aisle 1, Shelf 3. He stood, walked to Aisle 1, found Shelf 3, and located the book. He nodded, then back to the desk. Abraham's, Philip Shadows in the Fog, Aisle 1, Shelf 4. He repeated the process, verifying each title, confirming each barcode. The task took nearly an hour, even though he only reviewed a fraction of the list each day, but it brought him peace. He liked knowing the books were where they belonged, that order had been kept, that nothing unexpected had occurred. Asterisks and pages had notes in the margins. Small scribbles in Harold's neat handwriting. Slight tear on page 147, repaired March 12th. Binding loose. Recommend tape. Page edges curling minor heat. Read on, title by title, row by row. The library. Quiet as always. The clock ticking. And Harold, still smiling slightly, satisfied with each small confirmation that nothing had changed. Certainly. Here's the continuation of Harold's calm and uneventful day. These are sections 6 to 10, each approximately 1,000 words, keeping the same soothing, repetitive tone, perfect for helping someone drift into sleep. At precisely 12:03 p.m., Harold stood from the chair behind the front desk, closed the inventory binder with a quiet thump, and walked to the break room at the back of the library. It was a small space, one table, two chairs, a cupboard with mismatched mugs, and a mini refrigerator that hummed louder in the summer. He opened the fridge, revealing a neatly wrapped sandwich on the top shelf. It was ham and cucumber, just like every Tuesday, not because Tuesday needed to be ham and cucumber day, but because last week had been, and the week before that too. That was enough reason for Harold. He placed the sandwich on a plate, white with a small chip at the edge, and poured himself a glass of tap water, not chilled, just cool. He didn't like cold drinks. They shocked the tongue. Water should be calm, like Harold. He sat down slowly, adjusted the chair by half an inch, and unwrapped the sandwich with the same care one might unwrap a fragile gift. The bread was plain white, crusts intact. The ham was thin, the cucumbers evenly sliced. His first bite was small, but deliberate. He chewed slowly, counting 10 chews before swallowing. He always counted, though he didn't remember when he'd started. It helped him stay present. Between bites, he looked at the bulletin board across the room. It held old library announcements, a poetry reading from 2015, a photo of the former janitor who retired in 2008, and a paper calendar marked only with public holidays. Harold liked how nothing had been removed. Even the spiderweb in the corner had been there since spring. Halfway through his sandwich, he stood and walked over to the window. The courtyard outside was quiet, a single bench, a dry patch of grass, and a bush that bloomed once in July. It was now October, and the leaves were beginning to fall. One, a small golden one, drifted lazily down. He returned to his chair, finished the last bite, and dabbed the corners of his mouth with a paper napkin. Then he washed his plate, dried it, and returned everything to its place. Lunch was complete, exactly as it should be. At 1:13 p.m., the front door opened with its usual creak. A visitor, not unusual. The library averaged 3 to 4 patrons a day, but still, it broke the rhythm. Gently. It was Mr. Clive, an elderly man with a cane, tweed jacket, and an interest in topics so specific that even Harold found them oddly impressive. "Good afternoon, Harold," he said in his slow, precise voice. "Good afternoon, Mr. Clive," Harold replied. Nodding once, they stood in silence for a moment. "I was wondering," Mr. Clive began, leaning slightly on the desk, "about archival quality paper." Harold blinked slowly. "Yes, asterisk, specifically the difference between lignin-free and acid-free. I believe both are important for long-term document preservation, but do you happen to know which deteriorates faster in high humidity environments?" Harold thought for a moment. "Lignin-free is preferable if you're storing photographs or manuscripts. Less yellowing over time." Mr. Clive nodded thoughtfully. "And you'd say 120 GSM is sufficient for most binding work, unless it's legal documents. Then I'd go 160, of course. Thank you." Mr. Clive wandered off toward the reference section. Harold watched him go. The conversation had lasted exactly 1 minute and 36 seconds. It was the longest one of the day. He made a note in the visitor log. Mr. Clive's inquiry about paper types. Harold returned to adjusting bookmarks by color. The brief interaction settled into the silence like a pebble dropped into a still pond. A ripple, then nothing. At 2:05 p.m., the return chute rattled with the soft clunk of a book sliding down the metal ramp. Harold turned his head toward the sound with quiet interest, then walked slowly to the back of the desk and opened the hatch. 3 books waited: Mittens, The Brave Kitten, The Decline of Rural Cheese Markets, and *100 British Trees and Their Feelings *all regular circulations. He picked them up one by one and scanned the barcode with a handheld device. Each beep was gentle and satisfying. He opened the record system on the old library computer, beige, with a screen that hummed faintly and buttons that responded best when pressed firmly but not too firmly. He clicked returned. The screen blinked done. Next came shelving. Harold walked slowly to the children's section first. Mittens the brave kitten belonged on the bottom shelf under animal stories. He placed it upright between Buster the barn owl and asterisk Nibbles finds a nest asterisk. He straightened the spines of all three. Next, to non-fiction, the decline of rural cheese markets. He smiled at the title. It hadn't been checked out since last June. Shelf 3B. He dusted a bit before sliding it in. Lastly, 100 British trees and their feelings. This one had a green sticker. Environmental section. Shelf 5A. Next to asterisk talking to tulips. A beginner's guide asterisk. He adjusted the books so they lined up evenly with the edge of the shelf. Then he stepped back and admired the row, balanced, peaceful, as it should be. By 4:15 p.m., the library was silent once again. The light from outside had shifted, casting long shadows across the carpeted floor. The air felt stiller somehow, the weight of the day settling gently into the room. Harold sat behind the desk, staring not at anything in particular, but in the general direction of the window. A cloud drifted slowly by. He counted the seconds it took to pass from one pane to the next. 20-7. He opened his drawer and took out the puzzle book, one he had been working on for 2 months. Crossword 47. He stared at clue 9 across. An event of little significance, 7 letters. He didn't write anything, just read the clue again and again, enjoying the shape of it. On the far wall, the clock ticked, each second landing like a whisper, tick 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 somewhere outside. A bird chirped once, then silence again. Harold placed the puzzle book back in the drawer and ran his fingers over the desktop. The wood was smooth in some places, rough in others, familiar. He stood and walked slowly through the aisles once more, not to clean, not to organize, just to look. The books sat quietly, as they always did, their spines forming rows of colors, and titles, stories untold or told 100 times. He reached the window and looked outside. The bench was still empty. The tree had lost another leaf. He didn't sigh, he just noticed. At exactly 5:01 p.m., Harold flipped the sign on the door to closed. He locked the door using the same key from earlier, then dumped it out of habit. The street was empty as he began the walk home, retracing each step in reverse, past the cracked sidewalk, past the community board, over the stone bridge. The same breeze from the morning returned, only a little cooler now. The town was bathed in soft evening light, golden, fading to gray. When he reached his house, he unlocked the door, stepped inside, and hung up his coat. The house greeted him with silence, not the lonely kind, the kind that felt like a warm blanket. He reheated a bowl of soup, tomato and basil, and ate it slowly, watching the spoon disappear and reappear with each bite. He didn't finish the bowl, he never did. Always left a spoonful. He washed the bowl, dried it, placed it in the cupboard. The light above the sink buzzed faintly. At 7:15, he changed into his pajamas, pale blue. He folded his clothes and laid them neatly on the chair. He brushed his teeth for exactly 2 minutes, clockwise, then counterclockwise, rinsed, dried, nodded. He pulled back the covers, smoothed the pillow, and climbed into bed. The blanket was cool at first, then warm. He lay on his back, staring at the crack in the ceiling, the same one from the morning. No thoughts, just stillness. And in that perfect, uneventful quiet, Harold drifted into sleep.